Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 182, Getting Off on the Right Foot, with a young teacher panel. We are doing something different and fun this week. Just me and three young colleagues about half my age. Over the last few months, I have gotten several requests to do an episode dedicated to the issues and concerns faced by the next generation of educators. I have many future educators in my classroom right now, and many recent graduates from the choir program, and so this is near and dear to my heart. So I thought, what better way to do that type of an episode than host a panel? So in this lively discussion with Amenah Ghani, Madelyn, Merrell, and Victoria Devine, we compare notes on life as a music major in the post-pandemic era and the late 1990s when I was an undergrad. We also talk about ways young teachers should approach that first job search, and how our educational philosophies evolve over time from that first paper we all write about it junior year. Finally, the guests and I dig into some keys to success and mindset for young educators. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss this one. Be sure to listen, comment, and share your related experiences on this episode. When you see it posted on social media, you can go to the Choralosophy's Facebook page, and of course on choralosophy.substack.com, you can also join in the conversations there. Stick around. One of the best ways that you can scratch your back and scratch mine at the same time is to enter Choralosophy at checkout. When you go to sitereadingfactory.com once or multiple times per year, however many it is that you do to renew your membership, your students' memberships. Also, when you get sheet music at graphitepublishing.com and endeavormusicpublishing.com, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout on those websites and save as well. And of course, getting the best choral folders on the market at mymusicfolders.com allows you to enter Choralosophy at checkout to save at all of those great vendors. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/Choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. Patreon members really keep this show going financially every month, making sure all the costs are covered out of pocket. But they also get access to my Google folder of goodies, the private podcast feed. They find out who's coming on the show ahead of time, and a variety of other fun little conversations that we're able to have over on the Patreon page. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. All right, everybody, I am here ready to share with you a very special episode, something we don't do very often on Choralosophy, which is a panel episode where we are going to discuss today the issues facing, I guess you could say, the next generation of music educator. I host this show with a perspective of about 20 years of teaching experience, which puts me in the second trimester of my career, so to speak. I'm already thinking about retirement and what I'm going to do after I retire from public school teaching. And I'm going to share a conversation today with three people who are starting their journey along the way, and we'll compare notes and we'll discuss what issues are facing them. And I think the best way to introduce everybody is just to have everybody go through and introduce themselves. That would probably make the most sense to the listener. So let's start with Madelyn. Madelyn, welcome to the show and tell us about you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Madelyn Merrell, and I'm from Indiana, grew up there, and I went to a more rural school system. And then I attended Indiana University, and I moved to Chicago, where I'm now teaching in Chicago public schools.
Awesome. And how many years in?
This is my second year teaching.
Awesome. Excellent. And Victoria, welcome. Tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Victoria and I'm from New York. I grew up on Long Island. I'm in my second year of public school teaching. I work at an elementary school as a K-5 general music and chorus teacher. I also work as a music director, directing a spring musical for a high school. And outside of teaching, I love to still perform as part of a chorus. I'm a singer for the Evoco mixed ensemble with Dr. Dave Freiling. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and talk about my experience. I graduated from Ithaca College in 2022.
Awesome. Excellent. And Amenah, welcome.
Hi, my name is Amenah Ghani. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a sophomore music education major at the University of Delaware, so have not started really teaching yet. However, I do teach at our community music school. I teach early childhood music classes there, and I also assist my professor, Dr. Amy Pearsall, in our middle school Gold Voices ensemble.
That's excellent. And these are all going to be, I think, the types of perspectives that I think are very valuable for this type of conversation is a great place to start. And I think I'm going to start with Amenah because you're still in school, but even Victoria and Madelyn have been in school a lot more recently than I have. And so I think one of the questions that I'm interested in as an old guy looking back, what are the challenges and what is the climate, so to speak, of being a music major in college post-COVID? That is something that people in my generation, we talk about all the time. In fact, I just had a professional development yesterday. Wait, what is today? Saturday? Yeah, yesterday in my school district talking about the things that have changed for us in the classroom since COVID. You guys went to school in that post-pandemic era. What has that been like for you? The pros and cons, things that you think people should know about what it's like to be a music major. I'm going to go ahead.
Well, I'd say I've definitely had a lot of people coming into college telling me like, oh, join as much as you can, like immerse yourself in the experience. And then I found myself doing just a bit too much because the music school works a lot differently than other schools, and people didn't really understand that when they told me what to do and have different advice coming into college for me. But I would definitely say it presents a unique set of challenges, and you really have to find the right balance for yourself. For me, I really struggled with that, especially freshman year. I ended up joining like 3 ensembles. I was having the time of my life, and then I was getting like vocally fatigued and not able to like actually participate in everything that I wanted to do. So definitely making sure that you're picking and choosing, not doing everything at once.
Yeah, I think that might be something that's relatively universal. I remember for me in undergrad, it was learning how to say no. To no, I can't. So there was one semester I was singing in 5 ensembles, and my voice teacher just sat me down and like, this is not going to happen. You can't do this to yourself, that. But I also wonder in our modern era of, I almost think like things that I didn't have to deal with would be my not saying no was its own thing. But now there's also the pressure to be visibly doing things, that adding things to the social media aspect of it. I'm not sure how that changes the pressure, but it seems to me like it would. You've got in your generation, you've almost got to do everything, but then also show that you're doing everything. And that's how you build your personal resume online, which is very different than my generation. But yeah, anybody is welcome to weigh in on that, but I'm interested in hearing Victoria's perspective too.
Sure. Well, something that was really interesting about my college experience, and I think Madelyn also kind of experienced this, like, you're in your sophomore year. That was the year that everything shut down for me. Mm-hmm. And so I had about a year and a half of normal college, as normal as it could have been. And then everything stopped. We all went home, packed up, and it was like there was no music making anymore. I remember my professor at the time was trying to have us do Zoom chorus, which was an impossible task. And we would be making these videos, and it was just like, what is happening in the world right now? I'm singing in my childhood bedroom for an assignment that it was just so odd. But after that, like initial phase, going into like my senior year of college, doing student teaching, even then, like 2 years after, it was so present in our everyday. I remember I did my senior student teaching, and we were all still wearing masks, and we were preparing the kids for their first concert back. This was a high school chorus, and my mentor was super supportive, and it was great. And then about a week before, not even like 4 days before the scheduled date, there was like a new variant, and it took out half the chorus. And so we had to cancel the concert. Mm-hmm. And it's, now last year, my first year teaching, it didn't feel like COVID had as much of an impact. And even by the end of 2022, I feel like it wasn't as present. But it definitely heavily affected my completion of my degree. I didn't take any conducting classes in person. Like
Right.
that's
Which
a really
affects your
big thing.
experience.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
was all online. And so like learning placement and gesture and understanding cues is something that is just not present in a virtual setting as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really, really affected. However, in a positive way, I feel like I gained a sense of community from everyone going through the same thing and kind of like learning to appreciate each other in such a different way than maybe we had originally. And I feel like it's made me a much more um, collaborative and better communicator when it comes to my career now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just interesting. It definitely was a really big event for us while we were in school.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Madelyn, do you have anything to weigh in on this?
I completely agree with everything you both have said, and I can echo a lot of that. I'm just thinking back to my sophomore year and junior year. That's when we were supposed to start having field experience and like work more with students, and we couldn't do it in person. So I had like 3 weeks of in-person field experience, and then I ended up like working with elementary students on Zoom and teaching lessons on there. And I was like, this is really hopefully not what I'm going to be doing in my career. And it just doesn't feel like, the experience I'd want to have. And I think that there are positives. Like, I am glad that we could build community and appreciate each other. Or even like Victoria, the reason we really met was because we worked together virtually with our collegiate ACDA chapters. But it definitely had a disparate impact on our music education class and those majoring in it. And then moving into student teaching was also working with students who are masked, and then you can't see like their mouths or like even know necessarily like, oh, is this person singing this? Or like, how could I help with their vowels when they can't like see me model maybe in the way that I'd want to. And now in my current setting, as far as the impacts of COVID, I would just say that we've, those in my school have all kind of seen something with the younger generations maybe needing more like social emotional help and assistance. Like they're not, maybe as socialized as you would want them to be, or maybe they're just like so excited to be in school that it's just like a weird transition from virtual to in-person learning.
Yeah. Yeah, no, before we kind of move on, I had a technical thought for everybody. Why don't we use the hand raise feature in Zoom for, like, let's say we're having a conversation about a topic. You might have even shared something already, but you have a burning thought. And that way I just know that you have a burning thought and you can throw it back in there. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so kind of staying on the topic then of what it's like to pursue a music degree in our modern era. I think so. I brought up the kind of the way that coming out of high school into college during the COVID era, doing school during the COVID era would impact our experiences. I would say the other big cultural I guess, mountain to climb that you guys have had to deal with that I didn't in my generation would be the finances of higher education have changed dramatically in the amount of time that, the 20 years that have gone by since I graduated with an undergrad versus where you guys are coming out. Just to give you an example to make you hate your life, I'll share with you what college finances were like for me. So I went to a state school in state. And it was, I live in Kansas City, so there's a conservatory here in Kansas City that I was able to attend with in-state tuition, very high quality education. I paid approximately $5,000 per semester. Okay. And that's, I did have a few scholarships, but in-state tuition for me was so low that I didn't even really pursue scholarships because I was just like, I'll get a few and then I'll pay whatever's left and it's not that big of a deal. And I paid for most of it as I went. In fact, one semester, I had to, in order to get my transcript at the end, I had so many parking tickets on campus that it was the equivalent of a semester's worth of tuition in parking tickets. It was crazy, but the whole scheme was just dramatically less expensive back then. And so I don't have any student loans. And I was able to pay as I went. And that is something that unless you are a person entering college now with, a significant college savings but usually lots of scholarships and all of that, you're not going to reach, age 40, mid 40s like I am and be free of student debt. And so I don't want to pressure anyone into sharing too much of their, personal situation, but I am interested in what that's been like for you, in some of the things that you've had to deal with, just starting your careers with your financial ducks in a row. Would anyone volunteer to start on that one? Okay, go ahead, Madelyn.
I mean, in general, I think with higher education, you really have to think about, like, do I want to invest this money into like this degree? And that was something, especially with choral music education or music, it's something that people can feel uncertain about, like, oh, do I really want to spend anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000, $80,000 getting my bachelor's in this? Like, will I have success with it? And for me, right out of high school, I kind of knew that going out of state wasn't really an option just because of the cost of tuition. And even with scholarships that you may get, it really doesn't help too much. And one thing I'm thinking about too is, I'm someone who wants to further my education and learn more. And so it's important to me that I get my master's, but that also costs so much money. So it is difficult, like, feeling that certainty of that financial investment, but also, knowing that college is kind of necessary for this career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Go ahead, Victoria.
I can add to that. I think continuing off what Madelyn was saying about continuing and furthering education, in New York, we have kind of an interesting thing where we have to get a master's degree. And not only do we have to get it, but it has to be within 5 years post undergrad.
Oh, wow.
And that's to continue our certification as a New York teacher. So it's like you leave college, you're trying to find a job, you have to be certified. And then within that 5 years, you need 3 years of teaching experience. One of those has to be mentored. And you have to finish a 2-year master's degree program, all within getting the least amount. You're on tier 1 of your salary schedule, which is about the same amount as 1 year of college.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So it's like kind of crazy. And then meanwhile, I'm like, was living at home my first year. Now I'm in an apartment and it's like finding somewhere to live, paying for a car, but then also applying for a master's degree. It's also like crazy. And I have loans as well that I'm paying off and that kind of thing. It's definitely like an overwhelming process. And I think for me, like, I didn't know that much about it at all. Like, I didn't really know stepping out of college how much it would affect everything for me. I just wasn't very financially aware. And now I'm applying to master's programs for like summer programs because that's just what interested me and what made the most sense for my situation. And those are really hard financially because a lot of times they don't offer scholarships because it's over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like you have to make the choice of, well, I would be probably better off going for a full-time master's program and getting like a graduate assistant kind of situation. But at the same time, I don't want to leave my paying job.
Right.
So it's a really interesting balance. And I honestly don't think there's a straightforward answer. And I foresee like having to take out loans and it's going to follow me for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. In Missouri, we don't have a requirement of the master's, but we're incentivized to get it. Once we get our master's, we can then get a certification where you don't have to just keep worrying about your certification all the time. So about 5 or 6 years into teaching, I got a 99-year certification in Missouri. I think I'll be fine. I don't have to do anything. I don't think I'm going to make it to 99 years teaching. So I'm basically lifetime certified once, but I can't get that in Missouri without the master's. So that's kind of how they make me choose to do it, even though I don't have to do it, that kind of thing. Good. So Amenah, do you have anything you'd like to weigh in on this, being still in school?
Yeah, I'm really grateful that I got a good amount of scholarship from my schools. And that was a big part of the weighing process of which school I was going to go to, was like, oh, well, how much money would it cost to go here? And like, versus this school, like which program is better, and trying to weigh all of that stuff was definitely really instrumental in the process, and finances were really important. But I am very lucky to have my parents helping me out with the undergraduate part of it. I do plan to get a master's degree and all that type of stuff, and that's on myself later. However, right now I'm really enjoying getting my parents' help.
Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I gotta put into
Well,
it. I think it makes it a lot less accessible when it is that high, and it definitely deters people from taking less lucrative paths such as music education. And that's definitely something that I'm passionate about. But for myself, I'm grateful enough and privileged enough to have my parents helping me out.
Choralosophy listeners will remember RyanMain.com, but he has recently created EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, which is something different, something bigger, and something better. Endeavor is not a marketplace. It's a traditional publisher with a 21st century business model, which means that they have editing. Each piece is chosen and selected with accessibility in mind. Endeavor supports composers with a majority of the sales going right to the composer. Plus, there are tons of voicings to fit the needs of your program, instant downloads, full recordings, practice materials, and more. So head over to EndeavorMusicPublishing.com now and check out the catalog. Right. Yeah. And I think about that a lot too, because we think about the idea that some of us have access to having parents that can help us, which in my perspective on that is no one should feel guilty about that, because their parents probably worked really hard to be able to give their kids that access. But at the same time, we can hold that thought while also being compassionate to the others that don't have that. And I think about, because the way privilege gets passed down too, because I don't have student debt, I have more, rather than paying a student loan, I get to put away money for my kids' college, right? And because I only have a finite amount of income, if I was paying $4 or $5 or $6 or $700 or whatever a month towards a student loan bill, then suddenly I can't afford to put money towards my kids' college, and so that generational assistance is very wonderful when we can do it. It's just, not everyone can do it. And I think that's part of the conversation here too, is that when, in my generation, if you didn't have parent help, or if you did have parent help, didn't cause as much of an impact. Because if tuition's only $5,000 or whatever, then the person getting no parent help and the person who is getting parent help are really not on that different a footing. You can get your $20,000 of student loans and pay that off after 4 years, and you're fine. So it's an interesting changing landscape. Madelyn, go ahead, add in.
I just wanted to touch on that too. It's kind of heartbreaking how music as a degree and even just a career path isn't that accessible, especially for our youth. Like, I have so many students who are so talented and would be interested in going into music, but they're like, I couldn't afford a music degree, or if I wanted to go to a school, that's quote good or quality, it costs so much more money. And like, it's just it's so sad. Like, I wish that music and a music education was more accessible, or like something that our youth and even like people our age could see as, something they'd want to go into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has more thoughts on that, we can always kind of throw them back in. But I think let's move on to kind of the next logical stage in the young teacher's life, which is you're getting your career started. We've got the degree behind us. We're choosing that first job. We're trying to, in some cases, we hope we can choose our first job, as in we have multiple options. But in many cases, we take the first job we can get, and we make it work. That kind of thing. We're figuring out how the finances of being paid as a teacher work in our life, all of those things. Could each of you share? Of course, now Madelyn and Victoria are working. Amenah is still in school, and so maybe the thought process could be for Madelyn and Victoria sharing what that was like for you coming out of undergrad, trying to find your first job. And then Amenah, in fact, let's start with Amenah, if you can, just talking about what your current thought process is for finding that first job. What is your goal? Do you want to do grad school first? Like, how are you thinking about that at your stage in your education?
Yeah, so I definitely that's been a very prominent thought in my mind recently, being like, oh, like, do I want to get my graduate studies done first and then start teaching, or start teaching and then leave and go get my graduate degree done, stuff like that. I feel like a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives. The way that I plan on going into it, because I know there's a lot of different nuances with that, is to apply for both like teaching jobs and for a graduate degree and see which one kind of gives me the better pathway and see, oh, well, I'm getting a lot more money at this graduate school now. So like maybe it would be nice to get my degree now versus getting a job that I really like, maybe a top job that I would really want to go to and really feeling drawn by that. Because right now I don't really want to set myself to any sort of path because there's a lot of different options and I honestly don't have enough information to know which one is the better path for me right now. But definitely giving myself the leeway to choose between those would definitely be the way that I would go about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Victoria, let's hear from you.
Yeah. Well, I think that thought process kind of goes through everyone's mind, like what is the best path for me? And like I was saying with the whole master's things for me, like I have to get a master's. So it's a very big decision. And I know people that do both. Personally, I knew that I wanted to get a master's in music education, not in like conducting or performance. And so I knew that if I wanted to go back and do that, that I really wanted to have some experience in the career first so I could apply that experience to what I'm learning. I think that through my student teaching experience, I really realized how much I didn't know and how much just being in front of a group of children really makes you learn so much more than just being taught. So I'm grateful I made that decision. It worked for me. I could talk a little bit about the application process because I know that it was a very stressful one. I did not know how stressful it would be until it happened. And it's interesting. I don't know. I think timeline is different in every state. Like when the cutoff is for teachers who are retiring is when they know if they need to post a position. And sometimes in New York, that's not until June. So sometimes you're not getting these postings until June. And at that point, it's like, oh, I have a summer job. Like, what am I supposed to do if I'm working all summer and I have to also be doing all these applications? Like, it was stressful. For me, I kind of got lucky and got a job earlier on. I think I got my job about 4 days before I graduated in May. And I had been applying like all of April, all of May, just to anything I saw. And I went to school in Ithaca, which is more like the central part of New York. I was looking for jobs on Long Island, which is where I'm from. So it's a little bit of a different area. They're about 4.5 hours apart. So every time I had an in-person interview or a demo lesson or something like that, I was driving. And like, meanwhile, this is while I have finals going on, juries, recital season. Like, it's just everything's happening at the same time. And everyone is kind of, I had a position that me and one of my best friends both interviewed for. We were two of the finalists. That's so like awkward. And, you know, it's, I don't know. I'm happy I ended up where I did. And I think the option thing, like I did have a couple options. I was between an elementary and a middle school position. And I eventually went with the elementary position, but it was a very stressful process. It was like for about a month and a half. It was just like every week I would have a different interview or a different demo. And a lot of times you don't even hear back. Sometimes I would drive 4.5 hours to an interview and then get ghosted. Yeah, I don't know. Madelyn, did you have a similar experience?
Oh, I can completely echo everything you said. Like, the job application process is so stressful, period. But something I also want to note is the fact that certification costs so much money and we don't talk about it enough. Like, you know, I have a friend in accounting who had to take, her CPA exam, but it gets reimbursed. We have to take so many tests, at least in my experience. I moved from Indiana to Illinois, therefore I have to get a different license. And so I think overall, all of the certifications and like licensure was probably around a grand. And that's not even something that I felt like our professors or people in the field were like, oh, make sure you have 1,000 nearby to put that down. So that was really stressful. And then kind of just talking about the financial aspect of things when I was applying to jobs, I was thinking about like, where will I make the most money? Like, what state should I live in that might pay better? Do I want to move somewhere and pay for that to have a higher salary, or is like the cost of living comparable, besides just thinking like, oh, what type of school do I want to teach in? Like there's so many considerations and so much stress.
Right.
And like Victoria said, that's all happening during the end of your senior year when you have everything else going on, like your, senior recital and all of your final exams and finishing up with capstone. So that was really stressful. And I ultimately made the decision to work in Illinois. And I didn't mention this earlier. I teach high school choir because they have a really strong teachers union. And I thought I would just be making a little bit more money there. And so I was happy about that. And then as far as like the graduate career path too, similar to what Victoria said, I decided to do a summer program just because it felt a little more accessible. And I'm currently working on my master's in music education. And I felt like that was a happy medium where I could have teaching experience while I'm working on my master's rather than going straight into it. But again, that accessibility piece of a master's, or just kind of knowing the financial investment you're making, is something for everyone to consider.
Right, for sure. Yeah, one of the things that we have as an advantage as musicians, if we were to choose it, and if we live in an area that is conducive to this, is church work. So I started directing a church choir probably at age 24, somewhere in that range, which mathematically, essentially for me, got my annual income to match that of a person in like the corporate world who is working full time. So if you think about like a teacher's salary, technically, yes, we are full-time employees because we can't really get other full-time jobs, but we aren't actually being paid to work 12 months a year. We're being paid the 9 months essentially, and then having that spread out over 12 months. So by adding a church job into my world, I essentially was getting to that full-time income, and I did that pretty early on in my career, which helped a lot. And so, of course, then if you're a person who goes to church, then that's easy, and you can try to incorporate that into your life. But if you're not, then that is a different decision. But at least I think about that a lot as like, well, math teachers can't do that. There's no math choir at their church or whatever. It's harder to add like a quarter time income or a half time income, on top of that. But musicians, or it doesn't even have to be church, gigging, performing, those types of things. A lot of musicians or music teachers are able to supplement their income, which is something that is very nice. But I think about too, another thing, and I want to see what you guys think about this. Of how the typical public school salary is structured over the course of your career is something that I didn't really fully understand the implications of when I was your age. Thinking about how most districts anyway really start investing in their teachers when they've passed that 5-year mark. They've earned tenure. Statistically, they're less likely to quit if they've made it 5 years. Most teachers quit within the first 5 years, and so the school districts know that, and so they start to pay you better when we get to that point. And so just to give you some background, more things from old person perspective. If you're old enough to have been teaching back when the 2008 economic crash occurred, which in many ways we had an economic crash during COVID as well, but the government response to it was very different. And during the COVID economic crisis, the government responded by flooding the market with cash, just sending everybody money. People got money in their bank accounts. School districts got cash. Like everybody was paying people more. In 2008, we responded by cutting everything. And so we had things like when I was, 2008, I would have been in year 5, basically, was year 5 of teaching. My district froze our salaries for 3 years, as in we didn't get pay cuts. We got no pay increases for three consecutive years. Well, I didn't understand, really, that over the course of my career, that cost me about $250,000. because I then, when we resumed our pay increases, I'm now 3 years behind, and how, like, just thinking about how that works out mathematically over the course of your career. So I guess what I'm interested in from you guys is like, how much are you thinking about that kind of stuff right now? Or do we think of the kind of dealing with the lower salary now, making plans to be able to kind of catch up on life when you get older? How are you thinking about that? And feel free to jump in. Go ahead, Madelyn.
It's interesting you say that, because I had college professors who were like, if you want to make a move in your career, you should try to do it within the first 5 years, because something else we don't maybe think about enough is like, if you move from, let's say, one state to another, they might not necessarily pay you if you have 10 years of experience for your 10 years of experience. And that's something you're kind of like, what? And so,
Yeah.
so that is something I think about. And that's another aspect of starting this career that's so overwhelming. Like, okay, I know I want to work here now, but what if I want to move eventually, but my salary isn't necessarily promised? And it is interesting too how teaching is just a job in general where you're just moving up in income every year. There's not necessarily like an incentive or, oh, like you're a great teacher, so you'll get paid more. It's just like, oh, year 2, here you go. So that is like an interesting thing to think about and ponder. But right now I'm just kind of dealing with my salary. I've taken up teaching private lessons on the side as a gig, or kind of getting some income from school, like doing the musical and stuff like that.
Yeah. Good. Victoria?
Yeah. I definitely think about it. When you're a new teacher, it's really helpful to have people that have been there for 10 plus years to kind of be like, hey, I just want to let you know that this is something you should think about. And for me, that's one of my friends who's the library teacher. In elementary, it's like the special teachers are like a gang, we all hang out. And so she was showing me the salary schedule, and I was looking how the difference between, if basically how ours is set up is it's experience, on the y-axis, x-axis is how many credits you have and how many degrees you have, right? So if you don't get on that x-axis to your master's degree, no matter how long you teach, you're not getting past like 6 figures at all. Like you would not get there ever. But if you do get that master's degree, you're there within like the first 10 years. So it's interesting how it's such a big difference. And it like you were talking about earlier with the incentivizing, I definitely think that's something that they are showing there. And it made me really think about how soon I really wanted to get the degree, because I was like, oh, if I don't get this degree soon, like I am definitely missing out on a lot more than I even realized. So that's definitely a big part of it. I am working a couple extra jobs right now. So that's been helpful. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know for me right now. I really like my job. I don't know if I want to be there for the rest of my career. And the thought of starting over in a new district is definitely a bit scary, because a lot of times they don't honor tenure. Sometimes they'll shorten the process. Here it's 4 years. I don't know if that's the case everywhere. But yeah, it's like I have a good friend who's in her 30s, and she started teaching in my district at the same time as me. And she's been, she was treated like the same as me, pretty much the same process of tenure being 4 years. I don't know much about her like financial income. I think she definitely started at a higher tier just because of her experience, but it still is like you're starting over, even if you have more experience. So I think that's a pretty daunting thing with our type of salary.
Yeah, it is. It requires it planning in advance. Which is, I guess, an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage in that because in most public schools, you do, like Madelyn said, you're going to get the raise, whether you frankly did a good job or not. And so you can plan in the future a little bit easier than in some jobs, right, in the private sector. But now, so Amenah, Is this a worry for another day for you because you're not quite there yet? Or is this something you start thinking about already and learning about? And how does that live in your world?
Yeah, so I definitely am not thinking about it as much as everyone else here is thinking about it. However, I do think about it in the aspect of I want to teach middle school and high school and collegiately at some point in my career. And so being able to hit all those markers is like, oh, well, in theory, I guess it would make the most sense for me to teach middle school, then apply for my master's, and then stay at the same job for X amount of time, and then go back, get my doctorate, and eventually teach at the collegiate level. But like, I don't know what life's going to hand me. And I'm trying, as much as a perfectionist as I am and like control freak I am, I'm trying to be like, okay, don't think about this too much yet. Like, you're going to freak yourself out. But that's where I am with it.
That makes sense. It makes sense. It is kind of, in some ways, it's, you can only handle so many problems all at once. And so you've got to get the degree and get there and then worry about that. Now it's interesting though. I'm going to go back to something that Victoria said. So in New York, you were mentioning at the threshold at which you can get to that six figures. And we were talking about earlier, I think Madelyn said earlier, of considering cost of living, considering not just looking at salary. Because in Missouri, at least in my district, I will get to six figures maybe at the very end of my career. But at the same time, I'm sitting here in my, 3,300 square foot, 5-bedroom house that I can afford in a really nice neighborhood outside of Kansas City that would be almost unattainable by somebody on the East Coast. If you picked up my house and dropped it into the New York metro area, it would be a multi-million-dollar, estate, and it has a yard, right? So like, those are things that I'm being funny, but like those are the things that you also do have to consider: is what type of lifestyle do you want? What type of space do you want to occupy? Those things. So I think that. We can pause for a second to look at that. My audio seems fine. Is it Victoria? Is it your hearing?
I think I'm gonna go change my from wireless to plugged in headphones because I'm getting a glitch. So I'll just be 2 seconds.
Yep. No, you're good. So I was thinking about that because in my salary schedule in my district, it pretty much tops out at about 100K by the time you get to the end of your career. But in the Kansas City Metro, that's a pretty healthy salary. Like that's going to get you to that, I guess, for lack of a better term, American dream, middle class, lifestyle that most teachers are quite happy to achieve. None of us go into this hoping that we're going to be like a tech bro millionaire or whatever. Like that's not what we're hoping to achieve. But I would say that we've all touched on this, but that salary schedule in your district, and this is for all those young teachers that are listening or people in the beginning part of their career, it is really important that you have in your mindset, I need to get up and to the right of that salary schedule as fast as possible. And I screwed up, like in retrospect, and I think partly for me it was because I was spoiled by my church job early on, where I didn't feel like I needed the money early on because I had that extra job. But then I realized later and did the math that my district the whole time was offering, because I got my master's degree only 2 years into teaching. So I've had my master's degree pretty early on, but then I didn't pursue any postgraduate credits. But my district would have been paying me more all along had I been pursuing those postgraduate credits. And I waited until 17 years into teaching before I pursued that option, because I'd always just been so busy with church and my pro choir that I run and like all the other things that I do. That I just it didn't dawn on me. But then I went back and did the math. Had I done that, 5 years in, it could have cost me $1 million over the course of my career, depending on how long I teach, right? Because if you can get up the salary schedule in terms of experience like really soon, then it's just exponential, because you're going to take that higher salary and then earn it over more years. So these are the types of things that, of course, I don't know how often it gets taught to students, that like when we're going at like the financial aspect of what, you're all shaking your heads. No, I don't ever remember being taught any of this stuff. Thoughts about that? And feel free to hop in.
I was just going to note again, and this is Madelyn,
thanks.
Yes, you want to move up the salary scale, but what we're also thinking about is that worth the cost of a master's degree, or where do I want to get like this schooling from, and how will that play out financially for me over time? So just being really wise about like what investments you're making in your education and your salary, and really thinking proactively about what that looks like for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I want to go into one other kind of big picture topic, and that is like, as you think about your future careers, thinking about our philosophies of education. I'll premise this with the kind of teacher that I am now, 21-ish years into teaching, is very different than when I was your age. My ideas about what is important, my ideas about how to achieve that important thing are very, very different, almost unrecognizable than when I was before. So we could almost think of this like a time capsule, where if you're willing to share kind of how you conceive right now of your philosophy of education, why you do what you do, what you try to achieve with students. And of course, in Amenah, in your case, you're going to think about, I know you're probably being asked to think about these things while you're in school, right? And write papers about it and all of that kind of stuff. So let's start with you, Amenah. Why do you want to be a music teacher? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? And how would you describe that philosophy for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to take that question like little pieces, but I wanted to be a music teacher from like the age of like 6th grade, because I grew up in a fantastic community choir, the Princeton Girl Choir, and I loved it. It was like my best experience in the entire world. And I had a fantastic mentor who was Dr. Linnell Joy Jenkins, and I talked to her like once a week, every week, even now. And she always gave me a place to kind of be unapologetically myself, allow myself to express myself in any capacity. And the skills that I learned through music in that space allowed me to freely be myself. And I want to give that to other students, and I want to give other students the opportunity to be able to unapologetically express themselves and have the fundamental music literacy to be able to do that, and just provide a space to make music and music together with different people. So that's why I want to do music. Remind me of the second part of your question. Sorry.
Well, just thinking about what you're hoping to achieve in your career. What are your goals? Kind of thinking about, once you have wrapped your head around why you're wanting to be a music teacher, it's almost the "and now what?" You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the age group, I mentioned this earlier. I want to teach middle school, high school, and collegiately, just because I think that those are the 3 levels that I'm most interested in right now. It could change. I'm trying to keep an open mind. However, I do want to instill the same values that I mentioned earlier, of trying to instill that level of music literacy and high level music making, while also fostering the social and emotional aspect of choir, because that's something that's been really a big part of why I joined choir and why I've stayed in it for so long. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Victoria, let's hear from you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you bring up philosophy of education. I recently revisited that when applying for my master's because they always ask you about that. And I went back and kind of read through mine, it's not really much of a time capsule from like 3 years ago, but I think I wrote it as a junior in college, and I already had to change a lot of it because it was very idealistic.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that having a definitive philosophy is not going to serve me that well, because I think it's constantly changing. But something that I have kept with me so far is that I really want to prioritize the love of music making for my students, and how that translates into longevity of music making. I have a very special situation where if I stay at my job for 6 years, I will have seen through a student from kindergarten through 5th grade. And that's such an interesting thing, to be their first exposure to music and kind of shape the rest of it. I remember my elementary teacher. I still talk to her. And she actually became my middle school teacher after that. So I had her for a very long time. But I think it's a very special place to be, where I get to really be these kids' first experience. I think my philosophy is probably a bit different with my age group, as opposed to maybe in a high school position, I would feel like a little bit different. I don't know though, because I've never really done that.
Right.
But for me right now, it's like fostering that loving for music making. And that's kind of what I try to remind myself
Yeah.
as I'm going through it. I think going into the future, I don't know where I'm going to be. And as much as I think about it, I try to prioritize the now and where I'm at right now, and just not thinking like 5 years down the line, just thinking, okay, I'm really focusing on the program I'm at right now. How can I further it while I'm here? And then I'm thinking a little bit ahead of like, okay, maybe in the future, I do want to have more of a higher education position, like in high school or middle school, and do more of a choral position. I think I would enjoy that in a different way. But I'm very grateful for where I'm at right now. And it's been fun kind of seeing the impact I've had, even in the short amount of time, and seeing like students get into all county choirs and things like that and enjoy experiences because I got them there,
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah. That is great. Before I get to you, Madelyn, I want to drill in on something Victoria just said too. You talked at the beginning of your what you shared there about your philosophy of education from your junior year being idealistic, and I think all of us were kind of nodding our heads when you were saying that, and so that indicates to me that's kind of a universal thing. But I'm highlighting it here because one of the things that has gotten me in trouble over the years on this show is that I find it a very important criticism sometimes to remind people of within our higher ed environments, we tend to dwell on the idealistic because we get to sit there in a classroom with other people who think about stuff and really think and learn about stuff. That's the whole point of higher ed, right? Of going to college and getting a grad degree or whatever it is. But then all of the thing that I always remind people is that all of our philosophies mean nothing until they have been met with the real world. And in the case of music education, until they've been met with real live human children. It's like if your philosophies don't cause kids to know stuff better, then you need to fix your philosophies. And we can, but when we're not teaching, when we're sitting in our undergrad classrooms and writing these papers, they're always going to be like, we're going to dream up our music ed philosophy in a perfect world, in a laboratory, so to speak, and then we're going to have to go out and test them. And I think that's probably why all of us nodded our heads. It's like we identify with that. It's like, oh yeah, when I was a junior in college too, I was going to change the world and with my superpowers or whatever. And then we realized that it's just not quite that way. And I've my position on it now, 20 something years in, is that I actually think that that the impact that I'm having as an educator is even greater than I had ever dreamed. It just doesn't work the way I thought it was going to work. I think that's the way I would describe that. So yeah, that's good. Madelyn, how about you?
I think one of the things I just love most about teaching music is how we're always growing and learning every single day. Like not, hopefully the students are, but just as a person too, I feel like my teaching philosophy changes day to day. It's changed these past 2 years. It changed since I started my master's. So I really just appreciate the kind of process of learning and lifelong learning that we get through this career. As far as my own philosophies, I totally agree with the fostering the love of music and cultivating community. Like I think that the biggest takeaways for my classes I want students to have are like music as connection, music as community. And I think that post-college and in this beginning part of my career, I've thought about like how can we make students' learning experiences responsive to their needs, like centered around their needs and their interests, and like, not just like educating them, but like putting them in a position to educate others or like feel as though they're seen through our classroom decisions. And so that's something that I'm continuing to work on and find interest in. But in general, just a love of music and coming out of the class every day being like, I had a nice time in there and I felt like safe and seen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, in my experience, that all of those ideals that you guys just outlined tend to get easier. And this is kind of going to maybe come at this from a weird angle, but I've been able to be better at creating those environments in my classroom that you guys all just described as I got better in teaching them how to do the music. And that's important that we don't forget that, because I think in your generation especially, we're being taught that the reason that we do all these things is because of all these social and emotional health aspects of why choir is important. And those things are true. When I was in high school, choir was the place that I wanted to get back to as quickly as possible after my mother passed away. I needed to get back to school because my choir class was where I could be safe, right? So I'm not poo-pooing the idea that kids need that social emotional almost blanket to be created by their fine arts curriculums. However, very few of those friends that I needed to get back to in that environment that I needed to get back to would have even been there if our choir sucked. So like, because kids would quit. And then where's the environment that we so badly believe or so vehemently believe is beneficial for kids? So to me, it's always been a question of like, almost like that. What's that image of the scales of justice where there's where it's always balancing back and forth, right? To me, that's kind of the image I think about. It's like, yes, we're going to teach kids to about all of the, I hate the term soft skills, but essentially the soft skills that we teach them through music education, but without them feeling like they're good at notes and rhythms, they're probably going to quit because they feel dumb. And then we can't help them with any of the social emotional stuff. Does that make sense? We're kind of nodding, but feel free to weigh in on that idea of that balance.
Yeah, I would love to just quickly jump in. This is Amenah, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
I definitely think that the high level music making is something that really drew me into choir and just music in general, and being able to connect with people through like a mutual understanding that we're all trying our hardest and that might look different for different people. But having that accepting community definitely, I feel like goes hand in hand with the high level music making, because if you're being so cutthroat in that music making, people are less inclined to stay, and the longevity of like the students staying in the program, I guess, would deteriorate because of that culture. And so definitely finding a balance is something that I hope to find when I start being in the field and having my own classroom to kind of manage that. But in my ideal world, I'd assume that I'd hope that I'd be like 50-50, but I don't know, whatever the balance is for me. But
right.
I definitely think that both of them are really important.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, go ahead, Madelyn.
I also think it's so important with music literacy and learning music and going through the process of music making that students are like understanding and seeing firsthand that learning is a process and that they can do difficult things. And so of course, like, I think that it's so important and it does go hand in hand. And I just appreciate how music education in general gives students the experience to like have autonomy and see themselves as leaders, where they can like look at a piece of music, work on it, know how to understand it. And I think importantly too, something I want to keep working on throughout my career is just like students being able to investigate and digest like all sorts of music and like reading music from different cultures and peoples and people of just like different backgrounds in general, but giving them that like process of learning and knowing that, things don't always happen instantly, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. Now, I'm going to mention something too that I'm going to zero back in on this topic real quick, and then I want to get to Victoria. But you talked about how pursuing excellence looks different for everybody, and that if we get too hardcore about like everybody doing, reaching a certain level of excellence that's homogenous, so to speak, then we can turn people away. But the way I think of it is the beautiful thing about ensemble music, and I think this is true about band, choir, orchestra, any type of, ensemble music, is that we, and I'm going to do air quotes we, just to symbolize the group, we can get better constantly and pursue excellence, while I and you and you and you each get better at different paces. right? So that's difficult for kids to conceive of, say, again, in a math class, where their entire project is just their own ability to do the equations. There is no sense of we, right? But let's say all four of us, if you were in my class, you would be assessed individually over the entire time that you're there. And I would be able to show you personally that you are getting better at all the things that we're learning how to do. You would know, because you're not stupid, that there might be other people in the room who are better than you at those things. But you would still be being shown your progress so that you can see that you're getting better. And then as a result, we as a choir are getting better, right? So to me, I think that's the beauty of what we teach, is that we get to show kids that it's possible for you to be pursuing excellence at your pace, while also we as a group care about being excellent as well, and that's its own separate project. So I just love it. I love that aspect of what we get to do. Any thoughts about this topic, Victoria?
Definitely. Something we work on in my district is we've been calling it curricular mapping at the elementary level. And what we describe it as is, okay, what is our portrait of a fifth grade graduate? What should they know by the time they leave fifth grade going into middle school? And it's not usually something like a soft skill. It's usually the hard skills. Okay, what do they understand about meter? What do they understand? All of that kind of technical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that there is a standard that they should be meeting. And we've noticed that, I've heard this in many districts before, where sometimes they come out of an elementary program, get into a middle school program, and the kids that are really, really into music maybe don't feel challenged enough to continue. And then they drop. And then they go into high school and maybe pick it back up again, but they've lost out on time. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting thing where, like, something you said earlier just made me think of this, of how if we're not challenging the students to learn past what they already know, they're not really gaining anything musical from it. And it's not becoming something that is interesting to them anymore. Yeah. So I think that is a really big part of it. And it's like, I completely agree with you on the community aspect, that if you're not getting the musical challenge from the ensemble, you're not feeling as excited to be there. And like, oh, I didn't get it today, but the next time I'm there, I know I'm going to get it, and I'm going to try a little bit harder at this specific spot that I messed up today. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's just what I was thinking about. And especially when you look through K to 12, how sometimes it's like about where the kids are coming from before high school and stuff. And sometimes you have a lot less interest because of something they came from prior.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. There is a certain amount of engagement that is a two-way street. Of course, we all talk about how we want our students to be engaged in what it is that we're doing and all of that. But is the content engaging them? Is something we talk about less in our education conversations. Of course, it's an important conversation, and I don't mean is the teacher like doing enough of a like performative dance to keep them interested or whatever. I just mean is the content relevant for them? Are they feeling like, and in my experience, that is tied directly to whether or not they feel like they're getting better. It's that kids respond very viscerally to the feeling of like, I'm dumb and I'm not good at this. And so how intentionally are we crafting our curriculums so that kids are able to access the information and then feel like they're progressing along a continuum, which is why I've done episodes on this show about the way we grade as being so important for creating a system that kids can almost like the video games that they're being raised on in their generation, that they're always like leveling up their character. And that is powerful for their motivation. They feel like, oh, I'm on a higher level. Like we do Sight Reading Factory. I'm a level 2 this year, Mom. Right? They can brag about it. And my own kid is in my class, and she's talking about how she did her level 2 for her first final at freshman year, and she's really hoping to get to level 3. You know, like that it's dumb, but that's what kids that's what the types of stuff that they respond to. And so then we keep it relevant. So here, this has been really, really fun, and I want to kind of wrap this up with going around again, just to allow any of you that if is there anything that you want to add that I didn't let you add, or that things that you'd like to close with today, as we encourage the teachers of your generation to do this, because it's an incredible profession, but also do it with some thought and some tools in our toolbox to go forward with. Anybody want to volunteer to jump in? Yeah, Amenah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would definitely say, in kind of going back on the last question, I would also want to add in a special emphasis on equity and inclusion in the curriculum, and also like what I'm teaching and how I'm approaching different things, because that's something that I'm very passionate about. And just adding that type of stuff to the classroom and curriculum would definitely be really important to me as a teacher. And I feel like that would also improve the general atmosphere of the classroom. And also talking about the idea of challenging the students versus fostering that resilience. Because I know I'm going to tell a really quick personal anecdote, but in fourth grade, we all or have the option to start instruments in my district. I chose the flute, and I chose the violin, and I chose the violin, and I was playing it, and I was the shortest kid in the entire orchestra. And somehow, as a violin, I was placed all the way in the back, shortest kid. And my teacher came up to me at the end of the year and was like, okay, so I think you're holding back the quality of the ensemble. Like, you should probably try another instrument. And so in fifth grade, of course, I tried the flute. And also 3 weeks into the school year was told, okay, so you've tried orchestra, you've tried band, like maybe we try choir. And I feel like that worked out pretty well for me. But I think that would end up deterring a lot of kids into like maybe not pursuing music, or maybe trying to like take a different path, of being like, yeah, like I'm dumb, I can't do that. But for some reason, I'm very stubborn and I'm a Taurus. So I kept pursuing the path and fell in love with choir, and that was great for me. However, like finding that balance of resilience versus challenging the students and fostering that is definitely something that I also hope to instill in my classroom, in conjunction with everything I said before, and definitely a lot of accessibility type of things as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And thank you for sharing that story. That's one of the things that triggers me the most when I hear stories like that about people's experience with their music education. And at the risk of opening up a can of worms, because this probably would be its own podcast, but one of the mistakes that music teachers make, and here, I'll try to put this as succinctly as I can. Many music teachers are seeking kids who are already good to create an ensemble that make themselves look good, rather than, and I would say there is a place for that. It's okay to create an ensemble full of talented kids. Like we have community choirs that are auditioned, right? And you've got to be really good to do it. And that there's a place in the ecosystem for that. There are youth orchestras where you've got to audition from all over the region and come and do these like all-star orchestras. Those are awesome mountaintop experiences. All-state choirs, that kind of stuff. Those are important. But in your classroom music, I would argue that should not be the approach for anybody. I'm not going into my classroom and to search for the kids around my building who are already the best singers to create a choir. It's my job to teach them how to sing. That's my job. And so that you can tell that my blood pressure just went up from that story. Maybe you shouldn't play the flute. Teach me how to play the flute. That's what I would have said if I was an ornery fifth grader. But good. All right, Madelyn, would you like to weigh in on your final argument here?
Yeah, I mean, I could totally add on to what Amenah said too. Words matter so much, and we need to be that supportive system for our students. And I guess my final words would just be to anyone considering music education as a career path. Like, it is the best. And yes, of course, it has its challenges. And we all have difficult times, difficult days, like throughout, our collegiate career. And then when we enter the field, but at least in my experience, I feel like I've grown so much. I've loved my job. I love working with the students. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to teach music to students.
That's awesome. All right, Victoria, bring us home. No pressure.
Well, I think what I keep coming back to thinking about overall, all of the different topics we've talked about, is thinking about all of these factors that affect your decision to do what you do. And we're all coming back to this point of, well, we're still doing it because we love it. And I think that it's hard in the modern world to remember that sometimes, with all of the financial responsibilities, all of the deadlines, all of the logistics of maintaining this career that you love, but there's so many other things that affect it. And I think coming back to the philosophy of why we do it, coming back to the reason why we got into it in the first place, whether you're 2 years in or 20 years in, I think that's something that's important for everyone to come back to. So I guess I would say, like, whether you're starting out or you're in teaching now, but especially for people who are new, to keep an open mind and not get discouraged when it's not what you expect right away. And, I think it does get better. I would have never thought I would say that a year ago, starting out when I was in over my head as a first year teacher. And I still feel very in over my head as a second year teacher, and I may next year, and I may the year after. But I think that it's the moments like yesterday, I had such a good day. I introduced new songs and I was like, oh my gosh, the kids sounded amazing and they had such a fun time. And it's like those little moments that remind you, okay, I'm doing something that has impact and the students are impacting me in return. And I have that like serotonin boost as a result. So remembering our why, I think, is something anyone can take with them.
Yeah, that's really great. That's a great way to finish this. So all three of you, Victoria, Madelyn, Amenah, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an illuminating conversation, and I've been impressed with all of your insights. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, as always, for listening. On the way out, let's review the ways you can help this show survive for another 5 years. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary in February of this show. Are we going to make it 5 more? Well, that depends on you in the audience. The things that I need you to do to help me survive. Go to Patreon and sign up for $3 a month. If the entire audience did that, I could probably do this job full time. That's one way you can help. $3 a month. It's a coffee. So chip in there. And of course, enter the Choralosophy checkout code at sightreadingfactory.com whenever you have the chance to do it. mymusicfolders.com, graphitepublishing.com, endeavormusicpublishing.com all take the Choralosophy discount code, which helps you and it also helps me. And of course, the other big things you can do are to help people see the show, like participate in social media conversation threads, share the episodes. All of these things are huge and help people find the show. When more people find the show, I'm able to do it easier and cover my expenses. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you will tune in next time as we keep the conversation going.